Shohei Ohtani extended his on-base streak to 50 games, and yet the Dodgers still walked off the field with a loss. That's the contradiction that matters, because it exposes something deeper than a bad night at the plate. It shows how a game can be decided not by the biggest moments, but by the smallest failures repeated at the wrong time. And in this case, one perfectly timed single wasn't enough to cover for everything that broke down around it. The Dodgers came into this game with control, a 15-4 record, the most dangerous lineup in baseball, power numbers leading the league. They weren't just winning, they were overwhelming teams, and early on it looked like more of the same. First inning, Kyle Tucker launches a 2-run homer, clean swing, no doubt. Second inning, Dalton Rushing adds a solo shot. Quick hands, aggressive approach, ball gone, 3 runs in 2 innings. Game script established. This is where most teams start to separate, but instead something subtle starts to shift. The offense doesn't collapse, it stalls, and that distinction is critical, because when an offense stalls, it creates pressure without showing it. The Dodgers kept getting runners on base, they kept creating opportunities, but they stopped converting. That's where the real story begins. The obvious narrative is simple. 0 for 6 with runners in scoring position. 8 runners left on base, that's why they lost. But that explanation only describes the outcome, not the cause. Because failing in scoring position is rarely random. It's tied to approach, sequencing, and decision-making under tighter margins. Early in the game, the Dodgers were swinging freely. Pitchers were behind, counts were favorable, swings were aggressive and rewarded. But once the Rockies adjusted, the environment changed. Pitchers stopped challenging. They expanded the zone, they forced hitters to make decisions instead of just reacting. And that's where the Dodgers didn't adjust. Instead of shortening swings, prioritizing contact, and playing for situational outcomes, they stayed in power mode. And power mode doesn't translate when the window gets smaller. That's the first crack. Now layer in pitching. Emmett Sheehan gives them 5 innings, 2 runs allowed. That's not dominant, but it's controlled. More importantly, he exits with a 3-2 lead. That's a winning position. At that point, the Dodgers don't need perfection. They need stability. Then comes the 6th inning. Will Klein takes the mound, and this is where small details start to compound. Leadoff double, immediately, pressure shifts. Then an infield single. Now there's traffic, no outs, the margin is gone. This is the exact moment where elite bullpen sequencing matters. You don't need strikeouts, you need damage control. Limit the inning. Force weak contact, avoid the extra base hit. Instead, Klein gives up a 2-run double to Troy Johnston, and that's the game. Not because it ends there, but because everything leading up to it made that moment decisive. That's the hidden factor. The Dodgers didn't lose because of one mistake. They lost because they never created enough margin to survive one. That's the difference between good teams and complete teams. Good teams generate offense. Complete teams convert it. Now, shift to Ohtani, because his performance exists almost in isolation from the rest of the game. And that's what makes it so revealing. On paper, he extends the streak, 50 consecutive games reaching base, historic. But the path to get there wasn't clean. First plate appearance, he reaches on an error, doesn't count toward the streak. Later, catcher's interference, again, doesn't count. Those are opportunities, but not official successes. Then a ground out, a fly out, nothing solid, nothing controlled. This wasn't a night where Ohtani was locked in. It was a night where he was searching. That's important, because streaks like this don't just require talent. They require adaptability when timing isn't perfect. And for most of the game, Ohtani didn't have it. Which brings us to the 9th inning. 2 outs, bases not in a critical scoring situation, and 1 final chance. This is where streaks usually end. Not dramatically, but quietly. A routine out, a slightly mistimed swing, game over, streak over. And the pitcher, Victor Vodnik, knows exactly what's at stake. He doesn't need to overpower Ohtani. He just needs 1 clean execution, 1 mistake avoided. That's it. This is where the entire game compresses into a single moment. And here's where Ohtani does something the rest of the lineup didn't. He changes approach. He doesn't look for power. He doesn't try to tie the game with 1 swing. He simplifies. Shorter swing, controlled contact, ball in play, single to right, streak alive. That's the turning point, not in the score, but in understanding what happened. Because Ohtani succeeded by doing the exact opposite of what the Dodgers failed to do all night. He adjusted to the situation. They didn't. That contrast is everything. Now let's go deeper. Why didn't the Dodgers adjust? Because success early in games can create false confidence in approach. When power works early, hitters trust it. They don't feel the need to change. But baseball doesn't stay static. Pitchers adapt. They stop giving hittable pitches. They force hitters into uncomfortable decisions. And if the hitters don't adjust back, the game tilts. That's exactly what happened here. The Dodgers kept swinging like they were still in the first inning. The Rockies pitched like it was the sixth. Mismatch. Now consider the sequencing of their missed opportunities. Runners on base in multiple innings. No conversion. That doesn't just waste chances, it builds pressure. Each failed at bat increases the importance of the next one. And by the time the ninth inning arrives, the game is no longer being played freely. It's being forced. That's why Ohtani's at-bat matters so much. Because he didn't carry that accumulated pressure into his swing. He reset. That's elite. Because resetting in that moment is harder than delivering a big hit when everything is flowing. Now zoom out to the streak itself. 50 games. That ties him with Willie Keeler for one of the longest on-base streaks in Dodgers history. Only Shawn Green and Duke Snider are ahead. But the number isn't the most impressive part. It's the consistency of adjustment within the streak. Because not every game looks like dominance. Some games look like this. Out of rhythm, timing off, opportunities slipping away, and still, he finds a way. That's what separates streaks from hot stretches. Hot stretches depend on feel. Streaks depend on process, and Ohtani's process travels even when everything else breaks down. For the Dodgers, this game is a warning signal, not because they lost, but because of how they lost. They generated enough offense to win. They had control early, they had opportunities late, but they failed in the margins. Situational hitting, bullpen sequencing, in-game adjustments, that's where elite teams maintain separation. And in this game, the Dodgers didn't. Now take it one level further. This is their first loss against a National League opponent after starting 11-0. That matters, because it shows that even dominant teams have vulnerabilities. And those vulnerabilities usually don't show up in blowouts. They show up in tight games. Games where one extra hit, one better pitch, one small adjustment changes everything. That's exactly what this was. For Ohtani, the takeaway is different. This game reinforces something we've seen repeatedly. He doesn't need ideal conditions to succeed. He doesn't need momentum. He doesn't need rhythm. He just needs one moment and the ability to recognize what that moment requires. And when that moment comes, he adjusts faster than anyone else on the field. That's why the streak continues. In the end, this wasn't a game defined by home runs. It wasn't defined by dominant pitching. It was defined by missed opportunities and one player who refused to let the final opportunity slip away. The Dodgers lost because they couldn't execute in small moments. Ohtani succeeded because he could. One swing. Not for power, not for highlight, but for survival. And in a game decided by margins that thin, that's the difference between history continuing and ending quietly. It almost ended in silence. No big swing, no highlight moment, just another empty at-bat and a streak gone. Until the ninth. 2 outs, everything on the line. And Shohei Ohtani refused to let it die. That's the hook. Because while the Los Angeles Dodgers were collapsing in a rare, ugly loss, Ohtani was fighting a different battle. 50 games, that's what was at stake. And for most of the night at Coors Field, it didn't look good. First at bat, reaches on an error, doesn't count. Later, catcher's interference still doesn't count. The outs started stacking, ground out, fly out, nothing clean, nothing official. The streak was slipping. That's the tension. Because dominance, this was survival. Meanwhile, the Dodgers offense stalled. Yes, there was early power. Kyle Tucker launched a 435-foot shot. Dalton Rushing followed with another. But after that, nothing when it mattered. 0 for 6 with runners in scoring position. 8 runners left stranded, game drifting away. That's when the turning point hits. Bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, one last chance. Ohtani steps in, not as the superstar, but as the last line of defense for his own history, and he delivers. A simple single, no fireworks, no drama in the swing, but everything changes. 50 straight games on base. He ties Willie Keeler, one of the longest streaks this franchise has ever seen. That's the moment. Because even in a loss, he finds a way to matter. But the game, still gone. The Colorado Rockies took it back earlier. A sixth-inning collapse sparked by a two-run double flipped the lead for good, and from there the Dodgers couldn't respond. That's the impact, because this loss exposed something. Even elite teams stall, even stacked lineups miss chances, and when they do, they need someone to carry something forward. That someone is Ohtani, not just with power, but with consistency, with pressure, with moments like this when everything else is breaking down. The Dodgers lose 4-3, their first loss against a National League team all season. A streak ends, another one survives, and somehow that feels bigger. One swing didn't save the game, but it saved something else. Because when everything around him falls apart, Shohei Ohtani still finds a way to keep history moving.